Lovely to see so many of you here. So I'm Flavia Galvani, and it's a great pleasure to welcome here to the Blavatnik School. And it gives me great pleasure as well to welcome Ugo Gentilini, who is the global lead for social assistance at the World Bank. And he's actually very generous because every week, I don't know if some of you receive it or not, but he sends out a newsletter with all the news on social protection, all the recent evidence. So I think he's one of the most generous person I know in that sense, because if don't receive it yet, you should sign up for it, because it's amazing. And he's also wrote this wonderful book, which I was really keen to read because it combines two of my passions, which is history and social protection. And I wasn't disappointed in this light list, so I think it's going to be a great treat for us to hear from Ugo today. So the plan is for Ugo to talk about his book for about 40 minutes or so, and then Stefan is going to lead us on the Q&A. So thank you very much. Thank you. Ugo, please. Sorry, can you just please?
Okay. Does the mic work?
It does, yes.
Okay. Well, wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for coming over. So I would just ask for your indulgence. I landed from Cairo 3 hours ago. Over the past 3 days, there was an incredible dust storm that had the effect of taking away part of my voice. So I discovered I have some sort of allergy to dust. I used to have it as a kid and came back in my 40s. That's okay. But so hopefully you can still hear me. And since I mentioned Cairo, there is a place not too far from Cairo. This is a silver mine not far from Athens, called Laurium, that was closed in 1978 and was discovered in actually in the year 483 BC. So it was basically active for 2,500 years. And I'm starting with this unlikely place because it was the site of an incredible debate at the time. Athens debated what to do with the revenues from that mine. And there were two parties that emerged. On one hand, you had Aristides, who championed the continuation of an existing cash transfer program. Hey, there was a cash transfer program. That's how we know that there was something going on at that time in Athens because of a referendum that came up. And on the other hand, there was Themistocles, who was concerned about defense. And he argued that the revenues should be directed to the Navy. And there was a referendum, and people had to write the name of the person that they wanted expelled from the city. So if you were anti-cash transfers, you had to take a pottery shard and just write the name of Aristides, and vice versa. So I don't know by how much Aristides lost, but he did lose. And this is the cover of the book. It's a painting of Francis Schmuglevis of 1788 that shows the moment in which Aristides realized that he had lost the election, or not the election, the referendum, and he had to leave the city. Not very happy, but that's exactly the moment. So the fact that the third referendum in human history was about cash transfers, I think signals how ingrained these programs are in our societies, how embedded they are, how long-standing. And fast forward 2,500 years, if you do a Google, well, I did some analysis on counting how many papers have been written. Some are unpublished, but overall, how many have been written on cash transfers? That's 1.4 million over the past 40 years. Stefan has read them all, but he's the only one. But 1.4 million, in 40 years, overall signaling a positive outcome, and yet here we are with these long-standing questions of why is it that despite generally positive evidence, we still hear a lot of skepticism in history as well as nowadays. This quote comes from a meeting that I had with a minister some time ago, and it looks almost verbatim from a quote from the 1600s or the 800s. We'll go through that. So why is it that there is this persistence? And this was what animated my journey, discovering where ideas come from. Why is it that we think the way we think? What's the source of skepticism? And by the way, skepticism can be well justified. Don't take this book as in any way defensive in cash transfers. It's not an advocacy book. It's an exploration. It's my own humble journey of understanding, or trying to better understand the roots of modern debates. And so before venturing, I was sure that someone had done this research already. And I, in many ways, stand on the shoulders of giants. So many academics and researchers have published on the history of the welfare system, or on particular aspect of social assistance, or on particular regions. But I couldn't really find a global history of cash transfers that would go as much back as possible in time and trying to cover as many parts of the globe as possible. So that's what the book is about. It's trying to draw the broad contours of this history. And I had to, at a certain point, I had to stop writing. Just for my mental health, I had to stop and publish the book, because I would have continued forever, keep researching. And I really hope that if anything, this is going to spark some further interest, and you can do a much better job than I did in this, because really there are so many other ways to improve it and expand it. And my takeaway on history, and I'm an economist, so I had this imposter syndrome of venturing to something that I don't know, and I still don't know. But that's when you learn, right? When you are out of your comfort zone. And I realized that history is about patterns. It's about the long-term trajectory. And it's a dangerous discipline, because it doesn't just help you understand the present, but you question it. You question why things are the way they are. And Stefan and Flavia and all of us, we are part of a community that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. It's almost like they're passing the torch to us and advancing this conversation. On the sides, maybe I should have counted how many people have written and opined and engaged in this. It's probably going to be millions as well. But we are part of this extended family that stretches over time. So I really feel like part of this community. And we have some responsibility, too, in bringing the story forward. Now, some continuities. So why is it also important to understand the past? Is because if you look at the present, in many cases, it mirrors modern practices quite strikingly. If you may have heard of social registries. These are databases that rank people according to their income or their assets. Who's the poorest, who's the less poor, medium poor. China had introduced such a system around the year 1000. They had ranked people according to assets and wealth and divided them in various communities in 5 categories. And the bottom 40% would receive assistance. That's exactly what Indonesia does today. the idea of being able-bodied that shapes so much of the debate on how to best support why and how to best support people. If you're able-bodied, you should be able to work. That's a core principle, a device for countries like Ethiopia and many others that adopt public works. Still, you'll see over time from the 1600s in England and even earlier to today, very similar principles. Conditional cash transfers, transfers that are given to people in exchange for sending kids to school or to health clinics. We always think that they were born in Latin America in the 90s. Actually, there were many antecedents in Italy, in Germany in the 1800s. The Caliphate of Omar in the 1600s had a sophisticated system of child grants and the social registry too. And child grants and child benefits are so on top of the agenda today. Do you have any questions? You can just raise your hand or we take them all at the end. I'll let you.
I think we open at the end.
We
but if
open
there is
at the
any
end.
clarification questions, I think
Okay.
you're, of course, very welcome to ask.
Okay. So there are continuities between the past and the present, but there is also a lot of diversity over time on the broad goals and functions that these programs have fulfilled in terms of economic transformation, in terms of helping with state capabilities, developing state capabilities, and social and political stability. There are a number of other ways in which you could organize it, or trying to categorize, articulate cash transfers in history. I just chose these three because they seem to make sense to me, but I'm sure there are other ways too. But let's start with the first one. Let me first maybe say that, as I was talking to Flavia earlier, the idea of jobs. Of course, income comes from jobs, but you also need income for jobs. Accessing a job is expensive. You need transportation, you need a suit, nutrition, childcare. And our forebears understood that. And for example, during the structural transformation in the UK, there was what Simon Fraser at Cambridge called the security exchange. People released land as their primary source of security, not necessarily voluntarily so. But in exchange, they got assistance as they moved to industrial towns and areas so that they could be kept there also during downturns. They didn't have to move back, so they were kept there and received assistance. The idea of labor reserves, that you keep it active, almost like during COVID, right? When people got paid while staying at home. So just to keep the labor reserve ready to jump back when economic conditions allow so. This is, I believe, a major undervalued role of cash transfers in facilitating the process of economic transformation. Also, there are instances, Como in the 1400s, or Belgium, Antwerp, of how cash transfers helped with a structural shift. Antwerp underwent this incredible change from being an industrial zone to an economy led by services and its international port, and that led to huge growth, but also huge unemployment. And the system that maintained society together was one of cash transfers. It was basically a form of non-contributory unemployment insurance, already active in the 1800s. And another element of economic contribution, of course, we all have this image of the workhouses as grim, punitive sites, prison-like conditions, and that's true. But there is also a moment in history before workhouses became the way in which we think about them. There was a moment in which Bristol or Hamburg, Munich, Elberfeld thought of building places to bring together the unemployed, give them tools, including the provision of cash, and organize them with a sense of economic security around them, and have a production that was organized around market principles. Then many of these experiments didn't work out because of the quality of the products and the sustainability. But the idea of a form of economic inclusion in a positive sense was there. Then the sweeping processes of urbanization and war kind of undermined many of these principles. And as we will see, there was also a change in rhetoric, and workhouses became something different to rectify the moral character of people. But before that, there was this moment of positive economic inclusion in several places. State building. Food security runs through the book as a major theme. India and modern Bangladesh had a system of pre-positioning cash and food transfers in anticipation of droughts. And we find evidence of that from inscriptions. And there was, it's quite incredible. So they were able to geolocate some areas, and they had storage facilities and distributions in the moment that the shock occurred more than 2,000 years ago. China, this is a graph that we often use at the World Bank elsewhere to describe an adaptive social protection system. An adaptive system that expands its coverage horizontally or gives more money to existing beneficiaries. Alas, China also had in the 1600s a system of forecasting prices, forecasting weather with simulated effects on prices, and that would inform the distribution of cash and in-kind transfers too. And around the year 1000, which is also more or less the time in which they were categorizing and ranking households, they also had a system of poor houses, were mostly hosting the elderly, and they had a staggered way of providing higher transfers depending on age. So age-related risks, so the older you were, the more you received. Ideas that we have today. My home country, Italy. Italy, or the Roman Empire, was known for its food subsidies, of course, the granaries, but there was a much less known, or at least it was less known to me, system of permanent cash transfers that was found in at least 40 cities. And this was interesting because it was financed progressively. The state would oblige landowners to accept the capital, a loan, and then with the interests they would pay for cash transfers in that town, reaching more or less 10% of the population. If you go to Rome, there are a couple of museums in Rome and Parma that have these marble plates where there are the names of the recipients and of the landlord that paid for them. I had to touch them. You can touch them. It's a social registry, open air. The role of crisis also is quite important, speaking of droughts, but even beyond droughts. The US, we often think of the US as not having many cash transfers in place. Actually, it had a number of them that started during the Civil War, the War of Independence and the Civil War, as compensation for families with soldiers, generals, and the system gradually evolved into an age risk system that still functions today, but it started during those two wars. There is a book, look it up, by Joanna Colcord also, that goes through the sweeping, there was a set of experiments that were going on during the 30s, during the Great Depression. It was not just public works, which were key to develop the federal infrastructure, but there were over 10 cities in the US that were experimenting in providing cash in lieu of food. And they had evaluation frameworks that were estimating the effects on consumption and the delivery costs of providing cash versus in kind, what we do today in many places. Beautiful book by Colcord. And Botswana also, it's quite a case in point in connecting or shifting from humanitarian assistance to state-owned national systems. We're always on the lookout for practices in that regard. I think that Botswana in the 80s presents a premier example of it. The last section, social stability. You cannot talk about cash transfers in history and avoid religion. It is so much part of the way in which we think about our roles and responsibilities in society, about the notion of work, of effort, of deservingness. So again, as an Italian, I thought of Catholic principles as somewhat indiscriminate. You should give to everybody. Actually, there was in the past this moral transaction of benefactors paying the poor in exchange for a prayer. But more generally, I discovered that even within the Catholic universe, there are many schools of thoughts. And if you start looking at what people wrote about it, a set of targeting guidelines almost come up. Who should receive it? Why? How much? How would you give under circumstances of budget constraints? For how long? It's like what the state does. And it's not just Christianity, and I went into other religions too. It's a recurrent issue. So the way we think about it is not just about the state. It's also religious institutions as well. There is a less positive aspect, actually quite a negative one too, when it comes to cash and social cohesion. In a number of cases, and I looked at South Africa, South Carolina, Fiji, cash transfers were used to amplify existing discriminations, especially in colonies. And also the way in which the administration worked. There was sometimes participating and being a part of the administration was seen as a path towards upward mobility in society. So not necessarily you do it for the right reasons, but Marco Lewin has written a lot about this. So there are elements. It's not just always a positive story. Cash does present also these instances of amplifying existing discriminations. it's hard to separate the history of cash also from the history of food prices. And a perennial concern of policymakers is how to tame discontent and turmoil as caused by high food prices. And high food, I mean, it's an empirical regularity in history, how to deal the food price dilemma, too low, too high. And there is also some econometric work in the case of the UK that examined the effectiveness of the poor laws in reducing prices. And cash also have been used more recently in the past 40, 50 years as an explicit means in elections. So it's not anymore something on the background, but they are also coming up in campaigns. You may remember Andy Yang in 2020 in the US, who ran for Democratic president, and he was proposing a universal basic income. Same in Malawi. There was a candidate championing a particular cash transfer. So they're part of the political discourse more and more, especially since sometimes politicians have discovered that cash transfers are more visible than tax cuts. It's sometimes or subsidies. It's harder to tell. It's a big difference when you get the check in your mailbox or in your bank account. And that has elevated, I think, the whole political salience of these programs. Now, all of that said, these different functions, these different goals, there is also a pattern that seems to underpin all of this social, economic, and state-related issues. And it's a pattern which starts by providing cash, people receive it, but then the structural drivers of poverty are not really affected because cash transfers are not really meant to affect the structural drivers, but there is an expectation that they would for some reason. And the moment that you have that coexistence of people receiving cash, but poverty still being somewhat there, you have that Minister of Finance that I mentioned at the beginning. People never graduate from the lists, from the roles. Why should I keep giving transfers if they never get better? This frustration mounts, and there is a change in narrative where cash turns from a response to a problem to the problem itself, and poor people with them. Provisions are tightened or made harder to access. Society suffers because maybe some would find some jobs, but most of them, what would they do? Crime, less nutrition, higher hospitalization, higher burden on families, NGOs, informal providers. That's our story of 2,500 years, more or less. And the canary in the coal mine is the issue of mobile populations, the vagrants, and the beggars. The beggars, on how they're described in history, is not how we think about them today. It's basically the problem of unemployment. People going around seeking assistance because they have no other means. And the way in which this was dealt, you can summarize it in 6 ways. But here in the UK, a few hundred years ago, you could be branded. If you were unemployed and you were asking around for assistance, you could be branded one of these letters on your forehead, on your cheeks, as a sign that you did that you asked for assistance, which was illegal. So trying to solve the problem by making it illegal to be poor or illegal to ask for assistance. Or here, if in case then you received assistance, you had to wear a badge on your left shoulder This is the Fleming town, I think, here, somewhere not far from here, in the Fleming parish, and P is for pauper. So you had to go around with this badge as a way of signaling and deterring others from asking for assistance, stigmatizing. And among the various corporate punishments and how to deal with this excess demand for help, there was also payments. So in 1539, the city of Zamora in Spain just gathered all the beggars that came from other towns, put them on a bridge, started paying them, and asked them to leave. They came back, but they got the payment. Now, how societies have been dealing then with this excess demand can be summarized in three broad ways, institutionally. We will see, I'll walk you through one by one. Sometimes they're a little complicated, but we go step by step. The first one is a shift in provider from an actor that is non-state to the state. This is the story of Europe of the 1500s. Over 20 cities at that time basically took over the responsibilities for cash provisions from the church, because the trends that were going on in Europe at that time, demographic shifts, war, sign of economic change, plagues, needs were just too big in magnitude for the church to absorb. And city-states said, well, now I'll take care of it because you are too indiscriminate. I'm better placed to say who deserves, who doesn't. I'm going to put a little bit of order to this mess. And the mental blueprint that emerged during those years of assessing needs, verifying based on able-bodiedness what kind of intervention you should get, visiting households in their homes, deciding whether to give cash or in kind, registered it, was born around these years. And there was a huge process of learning between cities. They travel officials from one city to the other, like what happens today, to learn about practices. So but this set the stage, the basic blueprint for modern provisions. But we also have seen the opposite. Sometimes states themselves, like municipal states in the US, during the economic crisis of the late 1800s, needs were out of control. And the state was in the same position as the church was in the 1500s. Was given to perceived, it was given to many. So there was a group of NGOs, civil society, that came up with the idea of scientific charity, largely based on the German model, but again, with the same spirit of scientifically ascertain who needs and who deserves and who doesn't. Here is interesting because some of the work by Viviana Zelizer and others have looked at the social meaning of money. We look at money as a means, just a transaction, but there was a lot of research that went into how people perceive and treat and value money differently based on the provider. And there was also an element of involvement of the middle class. So if you're a middle class, you would go and visit these poor households and offer a moral model. Again, the idea of poverty being rooted in your fault, in your lack of character, of morality. And so having this model that would visit you, would offer a source of inspiration. The US is kind of a hybrid case where in the 80s and 90s, we know that during those years, provisions went down, or maybe not. Actually, during the Reagan years, provisions didn't go down quantitatively. They were made more difficult to access. And costs were shifted towards private sector companies that were meant to enforce a number of conditionalities. The discussion of work requirements that we hear every day, that's what happened. Basically, you had the same level of financing, and less people eventually accessed the cash because it was made more difficult for them to access. But in principle, they were entitled to it. And finally, and this is probably the most fundamental change, I think, in one of the most fundamental changes. It's what happened here in this country in 1834. So the new poor law that crystallized a lot of the thinking of the time. And the founding fathers of economics were not exactly supporters of cash. But the idea on which the report of the reform was based on was one where ultimately, if you give cash to people, it's going to help them in the short term. In the long run, is detrimental for their welfare. So better to give as little as possible. Actually, Malthus said, don't give anything, but as little as possible, as difficult as possible, so that only the truly needy will show up. And here is when the use of the workhouses came in, and the assistance stopped being very local, and units were incorporated, and there were economies of scale, and the cost went down overall of the budget, but the administrative costs went up because these corporations, there were corporations, were very expensive to run. And what is interesting of this report also, which of course is available online, is that it was based on a number of surveys, national surveys and international surveys of the living conditions of people in rural and urban areas, of how countries overseas and territories overseas had treated this issue, except that the report was written before all the evidence came in. So the executive summary of the report was written, there is a timeline, you can verify that. It was an ideological statement. And it had huge influence on the way in which other countries have thought about it over time. Even China in the early 1900s, the US in the 60s, in the 80s, in the 90s, India in the 1800s. Many of the concerns, or the way in which concerns are expressed today, go and read the 1834 report. It's a blueprint on how to make a case against cash. And Albert Hirschman, if you have to read a book, don't read mine. You can read Stefan's or this one, The Rhetoric of Reaction. It clearly shows how the rhetoric is formed and how messages stick in society. And how that report, I don't want to maybe overemphasize it too much, but I think it was incredibly important in setting the narrative that still is with us today. This is my last slide. What do we make out of all of this? I had a lot of fun in learning from other disciplines. I think it's by lending from different sciences that we enrich our understanding. If we take a survey of this room and we ask, what do you think of the origins of poverty, the causes of poverty, probably going to have some different answers here. And I believe that the debate on cash transfers is contested because the poverty problem is contested. And these two things, today in the cash world, we go very quickly into discussing interventions. And I think we could do a better job in connecting them to a wider narrative on poverty. And the beauty of history is on how, at the end, you can argue that maybe whether it's your fault, whether it's society's fault, is a little bit in between, right? But if you look at so many data points, you start getting a sense of direction, a sense of causality, and you do see that these programs were a response to a problem. And you do get this history that allows this perspective that sometimes we get lost or it's so difficult to detect if you only look at the present. The cost of inaction, what happens if these programs were not in place? So the moment that they were tightened, again, some people maybe were undeserving and they could have found their way into the labor markets, but in the large majority of cases, they added to the cost to society in higher crime, in worse health, and in putting more stress on overwhelmed informal systems. It can reduce the cost of the state to cut them, but increases the cost to society. And finally, sometimes you can have the best evidence but not win the argument. And I think the conversation today needs to use evidence as part also of a broader conversation about mindsets, about why we think the way we think. And that's how history helps. Thank you.
Very good. Well, great. I was looking at your book. It's a great read. I hadn't seen it, the print version yet, and just looking at it, 1,500 references in the bibliography, 60 pages, not quite 1.4 million papers, but that's still quite a thing. And as you can see, it's a broad and very comprehensive kind of treatment of the topic. So before I turn to the room, let me ask you a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. So things, there are actually many of them, but I'm going to stick to two, and then I'll open up to the floor so you can start thinking about it. So the first one is to go back to some of the things we hear. You know, you gave a quote in the beginning of a finance minister telling us, these people keep on staying on my roll, when will they graduate? And now we have another set of things that we hear a lot about, and definitely with students here, we all the time have lots of lively debates around it. Silicon Valley's favorite cash transfers, basic income. So where do you place these things in these discussions? Are these just manifestations of old problems, or what's in it? So what do you tell that finance minister, and what do I tell, which chapter do I tell them to read, what things to read once they raise again basic income stuff, good or bad? So tell me a little bit.
That's the trick, Stefan. You had 3 questions into this one. Huh?
2.
Okay. Let me start with the finance minister. What I didn't put in that quote is that then we had a conversation about what he said. And I asked him, what is the problem that you're facing? And he's saying, oh, I'm not producing enough jobs. I said, okay. And then the conversation started pivoting towards jobs formation. And there is an understanding also that it takes time, it takes resources. What do you do in the meanwhile that can support people while also being in line with your long-term vision. And he started seeing that, and in fact, they have a large cash transfer program now, that country. And I'm not blaming or suggesting any causality here, but I think sometimes there is an instinctive reaction based on our priors about how we see the world, or how we are trained, how we were raised, where we lived, the experience that we all had, that you take a certain position fairly quickly. And in his mind, he just looked at this association without thinking of causality. And I think that the idea of labor generation and the provision of cash, they're complementary. They're always framed as either or. If we start realizing that if I need a job, as we were saying at the beginning, I need some income to access a job. I need to be well-fed. I need to get to the job. I need a basic conducive environment around me, taking care of the kids, family, so that I can contribute. That part is often overlooked. And it's just about you go and get the job. And it doesn't take much. If you just have that initial part that provides a basic level of economic security, then you start seeing the complementarities and how one reinforces the other. By the way, the idea of fiscal multipliers also that stem from these programs, we stop at the cost, especially with finance ministers. How much does it cost? Very legitimate question. But then do we fully account of all the benefits also that ensue from those provisions, and that gives us a fuller sense of economic sustainability? You give $1 in cash, there is someone out there that is going to respond to that effective demand. And maybe that person, that little shop, is going to improve its refrigeration facilities or hire an extra person. And what we see out there is that on average, for every dollar provided of cash, 1.3 is generated, up to 2.6, but on average, 1.3. If you have a taxation system that works, that starts sounding like sustainability to me. And we just have, I think, to not be defensive about it, and to have an objective conversation of how do these programs complement what is ultimately the key source of income and upward mobility, which is the labor market, and trying to bust some of the myths around it.
But then come back on that other part that I was trying to put to you, and it's actually, you framed it very well already, because you say, okay, it's a complement. The cash can be a complement to other things. Yeah. Of course, when people start talking about basic income, it becomes a substitute.
Yes. Yes.
And so how do you then think about that? How does that fit in this story?
So basic income, the word of basic income is fascinating. People refer to basic income with very different things in mind. They call a basic income, or actually it's quite different in the US. In the US, so long as it's cash, it's a basic income. Whether it's targeted or not, it's a basic income. In Europe, so long as it's unconditional, it's basic income. The true universal basic income given to everybody in society, unconditionally and regularly, is an experience that, to my knowledge, only Mongolia had for 2 years, between 2008 and 2010. No other country had it. There are, during COVID, there were 13 cases of universal provisions. But I think the narratives around basic income, on one hand, there is the Alaska narrative saying, which was like Athens, silver redistribution. Alaska does exactly the same with oil. So it's social cohesion, is we have these common resources, let's redistribute it. Silicon Valley is saying, we are doomed with the robots. They're going to take your jobs, but they should not take your income. So universal basic income is a response to a certain vision about the future of labor markets. In other cases, there is a philosophy of the state being too cumbersome and too much red tape. Just give money to everybody. Why do you have to be so inquisitive about looking into deservingness? People, the uptake of benefits is very low because people find it very difficult. All this is true, right? That it's not easy to get benefits, and going through all those forms, interviews. There are people advocating for universal basic income replacing chunks of the existing programs. Now, how many programs you would replace, that's a big question. How far would you go? Some people, oh, you don't even need pensions at that point. What about the minimum wage? So how far you go into replacing those programs reveals your real philosophy about what's your rationale for introducing it. Some see it as a floor upon which to build. Others see it, as Friedman called it, a Trojan horse to roll back the state. And you introduce this program and replace a lot of others. By the way, then you can tax it back. So at the end, and even some of the global proponents of basic income, when they say basic income, then you ask them how you finance it. They say, oh, through progressive taxation. Well, then the net benefits are not universal. And you look at how their incidence, they're pretty similar to the current programs. So you ask, what's the difference? And they say, well, it's easier to understand. Fair enough. Fair enough. The systems are complex to navigate. But asking these questions of what would you replace, what would you do it in the first place, how you finance it, can reveal the real motivation for.
And it's probably not for nothing that in kind of amongst economists, one of the early proponents of this was Milton Friedman.
Yes.
With the negative income taxation.
Yes, exactly.
So remove the state, give everybody transfers, but we do we do taxation as well. So it's like a negative tax that you start from. Anyway, maybe one more question before I open to the floor. I didn't hear you talk much about other ways that politicians like to think about what's the purpose of handing out stuff. And allow me, I was alluding to it earlier, tell you a story of Pakistan, where a lot of people can be quite proud of, both internally the country and in fact also from outside organizations, to at some point get in Pakistan the Benazir Bhutto income support program. That is a cash transfer program in a country that had very poor social provision, and international agencies and so on supporting it. The World Bank did it at the time I was working there. They did, and it was very much, and it really came out of nothing, and it's arguably a very well functioning, a reasonably well functioning scheme. So I spent a lot of time in Pakistan these days, and last summer one of my main surprising things was that, and I'm working with cabinet ministers, that every single politician I talked to would always immediately say, oh, and the one thing I hate is the Benazir Bhutto income support program. And they hate it deeply, like saying it's terrible. And it, of course, given that I'm quite a fan of it, gets a kind of a good conversation. It also, that's far of it, is that of all the conditions of the IMF program they're going through, that's the one I get mentioned most as the terrible condition, that they had to increase the transfers in the income support program. So if you start digging a little bit about it, is that what politicians like is to be able to do patronage. And these cash transfer schemes are transparent, they're well defined, they're clean, and you can't then give more to your vote bank and not. Is this, I doubt that it's unique. So how do you think about these things in this all these debates? This has always been a bit like this. What that lens, what that adds to you?
So the Romans had two systems, one of patronage and one of permanent transfers. Right. The slide that I showed on Alimenta had also a system called conjaria and others, manifestations of the magnificence of the emperor, right? So during festivities or upon a major victory at war, there were these large distributions of cash, and they were precisely meant to remind people where their wealth comes from. But at the same time, then you discover there were these other progressively financed programs in the background that are little known. So my first thing is, and another, before I say this, another footnote. I recently co-authored a report on indexation of benefits. It's interesting how pensions are index linked to inflation, not perfectly so, but social assistance and cash transfers are much less linked to inflation. And we came across a similar issue. Why is it that benefits are not index linked in a very transparent way with a formula? And one of the reasons is because maybe at particular points, especially for social pensions, especially around elections, increasing benefits is something that occurs. So I'm not sure that that is something that could be controlled. But I do think that, as the Roman experience suggests, and the overall landscape today, is that maybe you can have both, because if you take out the political side of it, it's very hard to make anything happen. At the same time, you do need a certain level of predictability and credibility of the system. Yeah. If you don't know how much you're getting, and if you're getting something, the system, you don't have trust in it. So the question is how we can combine, and that's what you talk about in your book, by the way. So I should start with some questions to you now.
No, this is a good moment. Let's go to the floor. Yeah, so let's take a few questions, and we start here, and then we'll go to the back to Ed, and then we move.
Okay, thank you for your talk. I like the sentence you've got there. Cash transfers are contested because the poverty problem is contested. And it seems to me that I think it's a more recent, historically going back thousands of years, concept of relative poverty is more recent, and that something like universal basic income, if you put it at a certain level, whatever level, you'd still have a relative poverty. So if the problem you're trying to solve is absolute poverty, it's a completely different situation. So am I right in thinking that the relative poverty aspect of it is a new dimension to thinking about what you're trying to do with cash transfers?
Right. Allow us to take 3 questions, that all right?
Thanks.
So Ed, and also at the back.
Hi.
What's your name, sir? Sir, what's your name? What's your name?
J, J-A-Y.
Jay.
Please, Ed, go ahead.
One of my big bugbears is cash transfers being sold as a silver bullet.
Yes.
And it's perceived by many as the sort of the answer to everything. I'm curious as to what extent that arose or has been a factor through history. Or is it a recent phenomenon? Yeah. Maybe that affects your conversation with the finance minister, but how far back does that concept go?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Hello, I'm actually a student here at Blavatnik School of Government, and I also work for a World Bank for the same department as you, Jobs and Social Protection.
Okay.
My question is, to what extent we should think on these kind of basic transfers or the transfer for the most poor about how they spend money? Because I maybe from the historical perspective and going a little bit beyond the conversation of in kind and in cash, but what I have encountered working in Eastern Europe, that many governments, because it's a transfer which is related to the poverty itself, really care what is it going to be spent on. Whereas pensions, we don't care what they are spent on. So I wonder what should this type of spending pattern evidence should play into morality of how we distribute.
Right. Will you go for the answer?
There is a fourth, or we go for...
Well,
three?
if you can handle 4, that's even better.
Yeah, why not? At what time do you need to leave?
Oh, no, it's 5-2. It's okay.
Hi, thank you so much for that presentation. I wanted to know what your opinion on universal basic income is and how you think of that as opposed to targeted cash transfers.
Okay.
I mean, did you have your hand up as well, sir? Yeah. So we can take the 5th one as well. Yeah, and then...
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Another interest on universal basic income. Do you have any particular course at Oxford
No.
that...
As I told you,
maybe it's time to have one.
Well, maybe, yes. Maybe you need to come then.
Yeah, okay. So, well, Jay, thank you so much for your question. Yeah, you're right that a lot of it is about the absolute poverty, when what generates it, and the moment that you think of relative poverty, you get very quickly into the inequality discussion, which generates also an equal number of fascinating conversations of what are the drivers of inequality. And you also mentioned basic income. If I think of what Piketty's view about it is, it's an elegant measure on surface, but it leaves the fundamental drivers unaffected. And he was also, kind of commenting on why does it make sense if I get my pay slip and I see plus 1,000 and minus 1,000 if I have to pay for it, right? So I think that on the role of basic income, it depends on, we had a book about it a few years ago, published in 2020. We try to make sense of the many debates out there, and without risking of repeating what I said earlier, it depends in which narrative you are to start with. Are you in the Alaska narrative? Are you in a fragile state that just emerged from war and that has a lot of natural resources, and that maybe there is a moment in history when you have to bring people together and this could be a symbol of it? That leads you to a certain conversation. If you are in the AI, automation, labor market conversation, it leads you to a different path, because then you start thinking also not the basic income as a bare transfer, but if it has to replace your income for work, it has to be a very substantial transfer. And then you start thinking of the system-wide linkages with pensions, minimum wage, all of it. And to me, the big question is, what happens if everybody has more income? Those that have power maybe increase prices more. If your landlord knows that you have an extra 1,000 and he knows that everybody have that, and that every landlord maybe says, time for a raise. How do you counter that? Then you get into the discussion on indexation too. But there are these, or maybe the market is competitive enough that there will be a reduction in prices. It's really a system-wide issue that we haven't really seen real time. But there are these interesting pilots and promising, the Kenya example showing that this protracted, extended, effective demand of a UBI has created a structural shift on the supply side, and markets have expanded and multipliers generated. That's great. But the financing of that is very different from the way in which the conversation on UBI is going. There is basically no state, very little state involvement. And then, or are you into the bucket of how to improve the social protection system? Should this replace part of social assistance and maybe part of social insurance? So choosing which bucket you are, and then there is a conversation to be had on the costs, the design features, the political viability of it, the financing altogether. And that's what we try to do in that book. What I see, though, as likely is that if you look at the patterns of some of the recent crises, starting in 2010, but especially during the pandemic, is that the moment that you have the monetary policy, conventional monetary policy, hits a limit, the point when you can get interest rates as low as you want, but people won't borrow. And now there is this tendency of just bypassing financial institutions, give money directly to people. The idea of helicopter money is basically a temporary UBI. That's unconventional monetary policy. That's where monetary and fiscal policy converge in the form of cash. So, and it happened a couple of times in 2010. It happened 13 times in 2020. And I think that if, hopefully not, but if there is another crisis of sort where you'll have really a problem with effective demand, it's more and more likely that countries will go for this one-off or temporary measures. Japan did it, Singapore, Hong Kong, and many others. So it's sort of a UBI in emergencies, in my mind, is more likely than impermanent. However, it depends also on the structural gaps in a country. It's not a UBI, but South Africa has this polarized system of benefits for the youth, for, say, the up to 18, and so for children and for seniors, but very little in between. And during the pandemic, they introduced a program called SRD that was meant for the informal sector workers, largely those that didn't benefit from assistance and insurance. The program is still in place. 5 years on, they have been renewing it year after year, changing it a little bit. But if you look now at the system of South Africa, it's basically a UBI with 3 different programs. And this because the problem of unemployment is so chronic that it's very hard to solve with demand side of the labor market interventions only. That goes back to the conversation with the minister. So South Africa, it's a de facto UBI. On the silver bullets, yes, that's such a risk, isn't it? When we look at all the fantastic impacts of cash on gender-based violence, on resilience, on human capital, on multipliers, on entrepreneurship, on stunting, hey, this works. But it's not that every program gives you all those impacts. Design matters a lot. And, it's something so concrete and visible that it's natural that it has attracted so much attention and popularity, because you don't have to wait generations to see its impacts, and it's something to which people react to, and you get feedback. But I do see the risk of backlash, and in fact, the sort of disillusion in the minds of policymakers that emerges when they see, well, I gave you cash and still the problems are there. That's when all those shifts happen. So the challenge is give cash, but keep the conversation alive on the real drivers. And that's where it goes to what aspect of poverty are we talking about? What are those drivers? Where do cash fit? What else is needed? And if you take the discussion to its natural conclusion, you're going to talk about power imbalances. And that's something that is so complicated that only Stefan can talk about. But that's the conversation what it boils down to. At the end, is poverty also, if not largely, about power distribution? And you know, it's not an easy conversation to have. How does that align with the prevailing system of economic organization? So it's that, but it was for me important to see where cash fit in these big ideas, because it makes your work matter even more. Because you see what kind of direct or indirect effect it may have on these big questions. And how people spend money. You have the best job ever. Wait, you are at Oxford and in my division as well. That's fantastic. How do you do it? You're right. There are two different weights, right? We don't ask the rich how they spend money. We ask the poor how they spend money. And it's a question of distrust, and it's a question of having to be reassured, of control. You know, there was one could criticize Twitter X for many things, but I love the comments, not the posts, but what people say. Of course, there is a lot of, but sometimes you could see certain threads, and there was a thread about a real person that was struggling, and then a lot of people started to share their own experiences. And there was one that struck me because she said, I don't go to parties because I'm ashamed in not bringing a present. So that's not bringing a present. And would the present fit in the definition of how a cash transfer should be used? Should it be just grains and water and electricity? This is about how people prioritize their well-being. So you can have it both ways. Either you trust or you don't. And the New York experience of the 1800s, the social meaning of money, there were some social workers that would walk alongside cash beneficiaries into the stores to give them guidance on what to buy, how to achieve economies of scale in the household economy. So there was a certain level of control, really at the very micro level. That said, the evidence is clear on spending. It's generally in line with what is desired.
Great. Let's take another round of questions. Yes, we have 3 on this side, and we have 2 on this side. Can we take them all? Because it may well be the last round. Yeah. Please go.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the presentation. I think you have been, without saying it, but using a hypothesis that everybody is a good faith player in all this, like the one that gives the money, the recipient of money. What happens when, speaking from Mexico, where we've been witnessing in the past two governments these kind of things happening, when there's the perception, and that's where my question, the perception of a bigger and bigger criminalization of society, where big-scale scams, corruption, cyber scams, and overall, let's say, organized crime could alter all these things and make money not arrive or not be spent by in the ways that you would expect. So, is the illegalization of society true, and how can this affect that?
Was there? Yes, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you so much for your talk. It was very inspiring. I'm Jessica. I'm a PhD student here at Blavatnik. So my master thesis, I'm Indonesian originally, and for the past 2 decades, Indonesia has been working so much on improving their unified database and also conditional cash transfers, and we have seen immense positive progress. I guess one of the most and also very important question that we're currently dealing with is there have been many scientific economic papers that have been proven that mention that CCTs and UCTs sometimes that unconditional and conditional cash transfer have different effect in the short run and the long run, and conditional cash transfers have been proven to be more effective for certain outcomes in the short run, and unconditional cash transfer have been proven to be more effective in the long run for psychological well-being, etc. And this is also the case in Indonesia, especially on women empowerment. So I just want to get more on your thoughts. Do we really need conditionalities in that sense, or where do we move forward? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think thanks for this presentation, which on the one hand is incredibly inspiring, because we see that cash has been part of humanity forever, and on the other hand, deeply depressing, right? Because we seem to be making the same mistakes and seeing the same patterns all over again. Now, you said this is not an advocacy book, and you say we should redirect the conversation to the structural problems that exist within economies instead of the silver bullet tendency that exists in the sector. But I want to push you a little bit on saying, given all of that, what do you think is the best way to try to break that pattern, that cycle that you put? Should we be going down the route of the sophisticated social assistance intervention that you showed also from history, that are trying to target very specific nuanced problems and solve them, getting people, cushioning income whilst the economy transitions? Or should we simplify, and do something not big necessarily, but other sort of categorical, less overloading, less holistic programs? Where should we go to get rid of this never-ending cycle?
Right. We have
hello, and again, thank you very much. I was looking forward to this book coming out for a long time, so appreciate that. So my question is very specific, I guess. A lot of the time, cash transfers are meant to be, and benefits of kind are meant to support people, but not to exit them from where they are, right? So do you see more discussion now about how you move from a kind of a support system to a position where cash transfers are part of a solution toward sort of exit velocity, so getting people off the rolls as you were talking about earlier?
Yes.
Yes, hi. My name is Olavo. I am a visiting fellow here at the Blavatnik School. I'm from Brazil, and my question is about this new program from Brazil, which I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. So, as I think you are well aware, we have a pretty interesting trajectory in terms of conditional cash transfers programs. Bolsa Família is probably the most famous one. A lot of evidence that it has some positive impacts. Recently, the federal government launched a new conditional cash transfer programs focused on high school students. And it's not transferred to the parents of the students, it's transferred directly to the students. And the objective is to reduce dropout rates and increase school attendance. Because of the solid trajectory that these kinds of programs have had in Brazil, by and large, the public has been fairly positive reactions to these sorts of programs. But there's one big contention that you hear coming up, is that this may take out the intrinsic value of attending school, right? It makes it it's about cash, it's about getting money. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that contention and in light of your research looking, 25,000 or 2,500 years back.
Yeah.
Do you see that kind of thing? 'Cause it's a little bit different than what you cover in terms of conditional transfer to adults. We're talking about youth now. So what are your thoughts on that? Yeah. Thank you.
Right. So before I let you answer, I'm actually, I will have to disappear to join another event, and Flavia is going to take over. So I'm just going to leave the microphone here, Flavia. But thank you. Thank you, Ugo. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So a lot of Latin American examples, and a lot on conditionality. So let's start with Mexico and the discussion on crime. As you were describing the situation, I was reminded of a paper on Colombia that documented the effects of the conditional cash transfer there in urban areas highly affected by crime. And the description of it by those who received it was, this is the only tangible form of the state that we see. And the fact that the whole issue of transparency, of security in delivery, that's a delivery question. And over the past 10, 15 years, there have been, including by Mexico too, there have been so many innovations in delivery. You don't even see the money anymore. You don't see it. Not even cards. You just don't even, you don't need cards anymore. Biometrics.
Deposited in your card, it's a direct deposit.
Yes, in India you get through the iris scan. I think it's still there, and South Africa actually had a bit of a challenge on some part of it. But overall, the delivery chain, I think, has become more and more secure as any other sort of financial transaction. So to the extent that you trust the financial infrastructure overall, you should be confident of that part too. But I'm still thinking about your question, but my instinct was the opposite, that it gives this signal of presence of the state in contexts where that are more volatile. So of course it's also difficult to operate in those circumstances, and depending on your design, who should be part of the program, who shouldn't, because sometimes the level of community organizations or the very state structures at local level are hard to reach. If I think of many informal settlements also are hard to operate in.
Just a clarification.
Yeah.
What people say is, why should we give money to a team who will buy a gun and join a drug cartel?
Yeah.
Who will participate?
It's not saying it's happening.
No,
it's out.
Yeah. Actually, in some operations, real life examples, some operations that reach 1.5 million people in particular countries, then you find two examples of a misuse of cash, a misuse, and you have the entire program that is shed under that light. So you have 1.5 million people, and for one or two cases that are picked up in the media, cash being used for other things, you have these sort of problems. And I'm not sure that there is a lot that you can do about that. Would you have a system as perfect as ensuring that nobody can buy that. The US has its e-voucher system that doesn't allow, it was called food stamps, but it has evolved and it's basically a cash transfer. You can buy so many things, but it excludes certain purchases. So that's how some countries are restricting it, by using these cards. Or Taiwan, certain stores only, you can buy whatever you want into that designated store. But the point of cash is to give the ability of people to choose. So if you have that case, that can be, from a narrative perspective, devastating. I agree with you. On conditionality, you have. I think you are in the middle of your PhD, so you are super fresh with all the research. But thank you. You're right that I think if I were to characterize the evidence on conditionality, I would say slightly more effective on education for CCTs, mental well-being for unconditionality. But then, like in the case of Brazil, the question is a certain dose of paternalism desirable? Other things that you would have not done if not obliged to. I will not get into the vaccination debate, but in Brazil, it's interesting that mothers of children that were part of the Bolsa Familia program, they got, because of bringing kids to health facilities as part of the conditionalities, they were themselves, they were also undergoing some medical visits, and they were able to detect very early cases of oral cancer. And the benefits for society of that prevention is huge. In livelihood, in welfare, in cost terms. Would that have happened if the conditionality was not there? Maybe less so. Maybe less so. So other things where the default should be unconditional, but where a certain dose of paternalism can be justified. Seatbelts. So I'm also still thinking about this, but also there is a great paper that came out as an ISA discussion paper 2 weeks ago that looked at the trends in strictness in conditionalities. And they found that in Latin America, they were stricter and stricter. They enforce conditions more and more. So you see over the life course, for the first 15 years, they went up, then they plateaued. But they never got down. So the overall direction of conditional cash transfers have been one where there hasn't been a lot of relaxation in terms of once a certain trust is being established of, now you know that you can trust the system and that you will get this money and that you can send your kids to school and that we're going to offset the cost of possible child labor. You can trust that. Still, the system seems quite strict. And that runs counter to what you were saying also. Once I was in a conversation with a single mother in Manila, and we were thinking of should we have conditional transfers in a city, big city like Manila, and she was so busy, shifting 3 jobs during the day. Should we add more to her bandwidth in, you have to remember those 3 days that you had to send kids to for the health checkups, and there is a lot of, CCTs are demanding. So that didn't happen. There was no need to make things heavier for her. Another example, though, in Colombia, where because of the participation in the activities that the conditional cash transfers implied, many women built their confidence and actually entered politics. It was because of those interactions that they built the confidence to speak on behalf of others and engage. So you could see that you have a number of different effects. The question on whether there is an increased emphasis on exit. Yes, there is always an emphasis on exit. Since the very start, look, I had one line at the end that I didn't mention, but a lot of this conversation is about where you draw the line between earned and unearned income, between what society perceives as being a legitimate source of income and what is a gift to you. This line has evolved. Social insurance, for example, is perceived to be a legitimate earned source of income. We should think how that line will evolve in the future. Will we go in a direction where we understand that these programs can complement your efforts and be considered a legitimate way in which society protects itself? Or should we keep considering it as a gift that you have to be grateful for and that you have to get out of it as soon as possible? And the way in which our economies are evolving, the way in which societies are evolving is that risks are increasing, they're not decreasing. So we are asking more and more to people. And I still feel that there is this contrasting instinct of wanting to support, but hey, remember that it's a gift and you have to get out of it immediately. The exit. You have to get a job. You have to be independent. But again, this idea of how these two parts complement each other and the fact that it's not that we have a perfect system of insurance either. I think in part, at the end, is about understanding that line and what we collectively think is legitimate and earned, even if you don't work for it.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. I think we are out of time, unfortunately, so I would just ask you to thank you again very much, Ugo. And if you want to continue this kind of conversations, actually, I'm just going to tell you, sign up for the Ugo's newsletter, because every weekend you kind of get lots of papers and ideas. And so you do feel part of a community of people who are thinking about those very difficult questions that we've been struggling with, I guess, as humanity for so long. So thank you very much, Ugo. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Thank you.